She was judged the moment she stepped through the door of the forge. A clerk sneered from behind a polished glass counter, his voice dripping with condescension. "Hey lady, the coffee shop's across the street." Another customer, a young man with the brim of his baseball cap turned backward, added with a loud whistle. "Canvas bag, worn-out shoes, must think this is a vintage boutique." Alara offered no response, her calm brown eyes sweeping over the room before she moved forward. The forge was less a gun store and more a temple dedicated to noise and ego. The air hung thick with the metallic tang of gun oil and a palpable, almost suffocating testosterone that clung to the tactical gear and polished steel. In the back, the rhythmic crack of a live firing demonstration provided a percussive soundtrack to the boastful chatter of the clientele. They were mostly men, their conversations a contest of caliber and kill counts, real or imagined. A few women moved among them, their posture rigid and their laughter a little too loud, as if trying to prove they belonged in this hyper-masculine arena. Into this world stepped Alara. She was a whisper in a room of shouts. Her dark hair was unbound, brushing against the collar of a faded green windbreaker that had seen too many seasons. Her jeans were wrinkled, and the toes of her simple sneakers were beginning to peel away from the soles, revealing the wear of countless miles. The gray canvas backpack slung over one shoulder looked like a relic from another life, its fabric softened and worn smooth with use. By every metric of this place, she was an anomaly, an outcast who had clearly wandered in by mistake. The clerk, Cade, a wiry man whose goatee seemed to be the primary source of his smugness, leaned over the counter. "You lost, sweetheart?" he asked, his smirk widening. "Yoga class is next door. This place sells heavy metal, not herbal tea." The young man with the backward cap, Milo, pushed himself off a display case of gleaming handguns. He crossed his arms, puffing out his chest like he owned the place. "Seriously, look at her. Probably just came in to ask for directions to the nearest thrift store." A ripple of snickering spread through the crowd. Heads turned to get a better look at the curiosity. Serafina, a woman whose tight ponytail and tailored blazer screamed old money, waved a brightly polished, but clearly fake, pistol like it was a designer purse. She shook her head with a pitying smile, her voice loud enough for Alara to hear. "You've wandered into a man's arena, honey. It's a little loud for you, isn't it?" Alara didn't flinch. She didn't scowl or offer a retort. Her gaze simply continued its slow, steady scan of the room, taking in the racks of shotguns, the cases of ammunition, the posturing customers. Her stillness was unsettling. The crowd expected a reaction, embarrassment, anger, a flustered retreat, but she gave them nothing. Her calm was a void that their mockery couldn't fill. Her eyes finally settled on the far wall, where the high-caliber sniper rifles were mounted like monolithic idols. She began to walk toward them, her steps quiet but sure, as if she were treading a path only she could see. The crowd parted slightly, their amusement now tinged with a faint, unexplainable unease. A burly man with a leather vest and arms covered in tattoos of skulls and flames stepped directly into her path as she reached the rifle case. He planted himself like a wall of flesh and ink. "Hey, Missy, you're blocking the view for the real customers," he boomed, his voice carrying easily over the gunfire from the range. He gestured dismissively at her backpack. "What's in there, anyway? Your knitting supplies?" The crowd roared with fresh laughter, some even clapping as if it were a performance. Alara paused, her hand still on the strap of her bag, and looked up at him. Her face remained a placid mask, but her eyes held his for a moment longer than he was comfortable with. There was no fear in them, no anger. There was just wait, an ancient, immovable stillness. The man's laugh faltered. He felt an irrational chill, a primal instinct warning him that he was standing on fragile ground. He shrugged, trying to save face. "Whatever," he muttered to his friends. "She's a nobody." He stepped aside. Alara moved past him without a word, her worn sneakers barely whispering against the polished concrete floor. Her fingers grazed the cold glass of the rifle case, and it felt as though the energy in the room shifted, like a storm cloud moving in without a sound. The laughter followed her, but it was thinner now, laced with a new uncertainty. Cade trailed behind her, his own sneakers squeaking obnoxiously. "Thinking of buying a Barrett, 50 cal?" he taunted. "Honey, those things cost more than your entire life's wardrobe." Milo called out from across the room. Bet, she's just here for a selfie to put on Instagram. Gotta get those likes, right? Serafina laughed the loudest, tossing her head back as if she were in on a brilliant joke. Alara didn't turn. She stood before the glass, her fingers brushing the strap of her backpack. The rifles inside were marvels of lethal engineering, their long barrels and complex scopes catching the harsh fluorescent light. She didn't lean in, didn't gawk like a tourist. She just stood there, her posture straight but not stiff, exuding a quiet familiarity, as if she had been in rooms like this 100 times before. The crowd's chuckles began to die down, not out of respect, but because her profound calm was starting to feel wrong. It was as if she wasn't playing by their rules, and they didn't know what to do about it. She finally turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting Cade's in the reflection of the glass. Her voice was soft, almost swallowed by the ambient noise, but it cut through the room with the precision of a scalpel. "Show me the MRAI Spectre," she said. "The internal edition." The words hit the room like a dropped pane of glass, shattering the rhythm of the place. Cade's smirk froze mid-curl. Milo, who had just taken a swig of an energy drink, choked, coughing into his fist. Serafina's manicured eyebrows shot up as if she'd been slapped. In the corner, an older man with a grizzled beard and a patched jacket, who had been silently observing the entire scene, took an involuntary step back, his eyes widening in disbelief. The forge, for the first time all day, fell completely and utterly silent. The silence was a physical thing, pressing in on everyone. Cade was the first to break it, his voice cracking just enough to betray his shock. What? That model is a rumor. It's restricted to Black Ops personnel. He tried to recover with a nervous laugh. You probably saw it in a video game, lady. But his words lacked their earlier conviction. The name had landed with too much specificity. The internal edition was a detail that couldn't be found on any public forum or in any game. It was a phantom, a myth whispered about by those on the fringes of the special operations world. Milo, feeling his alpha status slipping, decided to reassert his dominance through action. He grabbed a standard-issue AR-15 from a nearby rack, a heavy, solid piece of equipment, and, with a theatrical grunt, tossed it underhand toward Alara. "Okay, fine, you know a fancy name. But can you even hold a real rifle?" he sneered. "Careful, might snap your wrist." The heavy black rifle spun through the air. The crowd gasped, expecting it to clatter to the floor or for the woman to stumble backward under its weight. Alara didn't stumble. She didn't even seem to brace herself. Her left hand shot out, not in a clumsy grab, but in a fluid, economical motion. Her fingers wrapped around the rifle's handguard, her arm absorbing the momentum without a single tremor. The weapon settled into her grip as if it were an extension of her own body, perfectly balanced. She held it steady, one-handed, the weight an apparent afterthought. A new kind of quiet fell over the room, the kind where you can hear your own pulse hammering in your ears. Milo's mouth hung open, his bravado instantly evaporating, leaving behind a pallid look of shock. Cade's nervous laugh died in his throat. Alara's expression didn't change. She brought her right hand up to the rifle, her movements precise and unhurried. She inspected it for a moment, then set it gently on the glass counter. The thud of the rifle on the glass was the only sound. Cade, desperate to regain control, saw a new opportunity. He gestured at the rifle, his voice tight. "So you can catch. Big deal. That doesn't mean you know anything about it. I bet you don't even know how to field strip it." It was a standard challenge, a basic test of knowledge for any supposed enthusiast. A field strip of an AR-15 was simple enough for a novice, but doing it quickly and efficiently required practice and familiarity. Alara didn't respond with words. Her fingers moved, becoming a blur of practiced motion. They danced over the rifle's pins and levers, following a script only she could read. There was a series of soft, metallic clicks. The takedown pins were pushed through. The upper and lower receivers separated. The bolt carrier group slid out, followed by the charging handle. In a single, seamless flow, the rifle was in pieces. The bolt, the firing pin, the barrel, the springs, all laid out on the counter in perfect, orderly rows, like a puzzle solved in a single breath. The entire process had taken 8 seconds. No one spoke. The tattooed man who had blocked her path earlier now stared at the disassembled weapon, his jaw tight. Serafina, who had been filming on her phone hoping to capture a moment of failure, slowly lowered it, her own hands trembling slightly. Arthur, the shop's gunsmith, an older man with thick glasses and hands stained from decades of working with oil and metal, had been quietly observing from his workbench in the back. He now stepped forward, his eyes not on Alara, but on her hands. He watched the way her fingers moved with an ingrained, unconscious grace, a muscle memory forged by thousands of repetitions. It wasn't the practiced showmanship of a competitive shooter. It was the quiet, efficient competence of a professional. Alara began to reassemble the rifle, her movements just as swift and sure. The pieces came together with a series of satisfying clicks, each one a note in a familiar song. Her silence was no longer a void. It was a statement. It was a wall of undeniable skill, and everyone else was on the wrong side of it, their petty judgments and loud boasts suddenly exposed as cheap and hollow. As Alara was about to slide the final pin into place, she paused. Her hand hovered over the receiver for a second before she reached into her worn canvas backpack. The crowd leaned in, their collective breath held in suspense. They expected a tool, perhaps a specialized cleaning kit, that would reveal her as a hobbyist after all. Instead, she pulled out a simple, bent paperclip. A murmur of confusion rippled through the onlookers. A paperclip? What could she possibly do with that? Milo let out a short, nervous laugh, trying to break the tension. What's she gonna do now? Pick the lock? Alara ignored him. With the focus of a surgeon, she straightened a section of the paperclip. She then pressed the thin metal tip lightly against the receiver near the bolt assembly, her eyes narrowing as she studied the minute feedback through the wire. The room was so quiet that the faint scratching of the metal was audible. She finally looked up, her gaze sweeping over the silent, staring faces. "This bolt is 0.3 millimeters loose," she announced. Her voice was still soft, but it carried a finality that defied argument. She let the statement hang in the air for a moment before adding the critical context. In sub-zero conditions, that slight misalignment will cause the trajectory to veer off target by several inches at 400 meters. The detail was so specific, so arcane, that it was utterly baffling to most people in the room. It wasn't the kind of knowledge you could learn from a YouTube tutorial or a user manual. It was the hard-won wisdom of experience, born from situations where a few inches meant the difference between life and death. From the corner of the room, Silas, the grizzled man with the patched jacket, finally spoke. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble, filled with a dawning, dreadful realization. How the hell would you know that? It wasn't a challenge. It was a genuine question from one professional to another, acknowledging a level of expertise that far surpassed his own. For the first time, Alara's gaze met his directly. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, not recognition, but a shared understanding of a world far removed from this brightly lit store. "Because I used one to hit a moving target from the top of Sunla Peak," she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "During a level 7 wind, the name Sunla Peak landed like a physical blow. It wasn't a place you found on a tourist map. It was a classified location, a ghost on the geopolitical landscape, infamous in certain circles for a brutal, clandestine operation that had taken place nearly a decade ago. The details were sealed, but the rumors spoke of a lone operative, a sniper, who had turned the tide of a conflict with a series of impossible shots under impossible conditions. A ghost story. Silas's face went pale under his weathered tan. He had been a private contractor in a nearby region during that time. He'd heard the whispers, the fragmented radio chatter about a sniper from the Ghost Viper unit, an operative codenamed Arrow, who had performed miracles with a rifle. He stared at Alara, at her faded windbreaker and peeling sneakers, and the image refused to align with the legend. But the knowledge she possessed, the quiet authority with which she spoke, it was undeniable. He took another step back, his boots heavy on the floor. The man who had faced down insurgents in dusty war zones felt a genuine prickle of fear. He wasn't looking at a lost woman anymore. He was looking at a legend. The rest of the crowd didn't understand the name's significance, but they understood Silas's reaction. They saw the raw fear and respect in the eyes of the most seasoned man in the room, and a collective chill washed over them. The myth was standing right in front of them, holding a paperclip. The manager of the forge, a stocky man with a buzz cut and a permanent scowl, finally emerged from the back office, drawn out by the unnatural silence. He saw the disassembled rifle, the stunned faces of his best customers, and the pale, rattled expression of his employee, Cade. He understood immediately that he had lost control of his store. In a desperate bid to reclaim authority, he decided to call what he believed was a bluff. "Talk is cheap," the manager grunted, gesturing with his chin toward the outdoor range. "Let's see it then." He unlocked the high-security vault behind the counter and, with a sense of ceremony, brought out a rifle encased in matte black carbon fiber. It was the MRAI Spectre. Sleek, menacing, with a scope that looked like it could see into the future. No one in the room had ever seen it outside of a classified document. He set it on the counter. "There's a coin hanging out there," he said, his voice loud, projecting to the whole room. 150 meters. It's a store challenge. No one's ever hit it. Ever. Milo, seeing a chance to salvage his bruised ego, shouted out, his voice cracking with false bravado. "If she hits it, I'll mop this whole place with my tongue." A few people chuckled, but the laughter was thin and nervous. The tide had turned. They were no longer hoping for her to fail. They were morbidly curious to see if she could succeed. The crowd parted as Alara picked up the Spectre. The rifle felt like a natural part of her, its weight perfectly distributed. She walked toward the firing range, her sneakers scuffing softly on the gravel path. The range was a long stretch of dirt and weathered targets, the air sharp with the scent of gunpowder and dust. Far in the distance, a single silver coin dangled from a thin string, glinting in the late afternoon Sunday. It was a tiny, impossible target. As she reached the firing line, a man in a camouflage jacket called out, "Hey, little lady, don't trip over that rifle. It's bigger than you are." His buddies roared, but the joke fell flat. The atmosphere was too tense. Alara set her backpack down. She didn't fiddle with the scope, didn't take a series of deep, calming breaths, didn't perform any of the pre-shot rituals so common among marksmen. She simply raised the rifle to her shoulder. The motion was a single, unbroken arc of fluid grace. Her feet were planted, her shoulders relaxed. For a moment, she was perfectly still, a statue carved against the dusty backdrop of the range. She aimed. 1 second. 2 seconds. The shot cracked through the air, sharp and clean. It wasn't the deafening roar of the other rifles. It was a concise, powerful whip crack that sliced through the silence. All eyes strained to see the distant target. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the glinting coin seemed to explode. It split cleanly in half, the two silver crescents spinning in opposite directions as they fell to the ground. The world seemed to hold its breath. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier, and more profound than any that had come before. Cade's jaw hung open, his clipboard forgotten in his hand. Milo stood frozen, the boastful words about his tongue and the floor turning to ash in his mouth. Serafina, who had watched through the zoom lens of her phone, slowly lowered the device, her face a mask of disbelief. Silas, the old mercenary, closed his eyes and let out a long, slow breath. He'd seen legendary shots in his time, but this was different. This wasn't skill, it was artistry. It was a level of mastery that bordered on the supernatural. Alara didn't smile. She didn't gloat or look back for approval. She just lowered the Spectre, walked back to the counter, and set the rifle down, placing it exactly where it had been before. Every angle was perfect, as if she were leaving no trace of herself behind. She had answered their challenge, not with words, but with a single, undeniable act of perfection. The lesson was over. The spell of stunned silence was broken by Cade. Scrambling to find some shred of authority, he fell back on the shield of bureaucracy. "Hold on," he said, his voice louder than it needed to be. You can't test fire a high-grade weapon without registration. Where's your ID? Your license?" It was a pathetic, desperate move, and everyone knew it. The woman had just performed an impossible feat, and he was asking for her paperwork. Alara looked at him, her expression unreadable. She reached into her backpack once more and pulled out a worn plastic card. She slid it across the counter. Cade snatched it up. He held it aloft for the crowd to see, a triumphant sneer returning to his face. "What is this?" he scoffed. The card was nearly blank. There was no photo, no name, no address. There was only a faded emblem, a viper coiled around a stylized arrow, and a single string of alphanumeric characters etched into the plastic. A library card? The manager stepped forward, backing his employee. No documents, no access. That's the rule. Alara didn't argue. She didn't explain. She simply took her card back, slipped it into her bag, and zipped it closed. The sound of the zipper was sharp and final in the quiet room. She turned and started walking toward the door, her head held high, her quiet dignity intact. She had gotten what she needed, though it wasn't a rifle. A middle-aged man with a beer belly and a faded army cap stepped forward, his voice booming with false bravado. "Hey, don't walk away yet. You think you're some kind of hotshot?" He jabbed a finger toward her. "Think you're better than us?" Ilara stopped, her hand on the door handle. She turned just enough to look at him. At that exact moment, the front door of the forge swung open. The man who entered was tall and wore a perfectly tailored black suit and dark sunglasses that concealed his eyes. His presence instantly changed the air in the room, his quiet professionalism making the boisterous posturing of the other customers look childish and cheap. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of intense training, scanning the room once before his hidden gaze locked onto Ilara. He walked straight to her, ignoring everyone else as if they were merely furniture. He leaned in close, his voice a low, discreet murmur that was nonetheless audible in the tense silence. "Confirmation code 870, he whispered. "Your next mission begins tonight." Then he did something that made the blood run cold in the veins of the few who understood. He straightened up, lowered his head in a short, respectful nod, and placed his right hand flat against the center of his chest. Arthur, the gunsmith, gasped softly. Silas, the mercenary, froze, his face turning ashen. It was the Ghost Viper salute, a gesture of ultimate respect reserved only for the unit's most revered operatives for legends who officially didn't exist. The truth crashed down on the room with the force of a physical blow. Cade dropped his clipboard, the clatter echoing like a gunshot in the silence. Milo's energy drink slipped from his numb fingers and rolled under a display case. Serafina pressed herself against the counter, her eyes wide with terror, clutching her purse like it could somehow protect her. This wasn't just a skilled shooter. This wasn't just a veteran. This was a ghost, a living legend, walking among them in a faded windbreaker and worn-out shoes. Ilara gave the man in the suit a single, sharp nod. She turned and gave the stunned, silent crowd one last, lingering look. Her face was still calm, but now her silence felt different. It was the silence of a predator that had chosen, for the moment, not to strike. Then, she and the agent were gone, the door swinging shut behind them, leaving a room full of broken egos and chilling revelations. Ilara left the forge behind without a second glance, melting back into the world as quietly as she had appeared. But her presence had left a permanent mark, a crack in the foundation of the store's arrogant culture. The consequences began to roll in, not with a bang, but with the unstoppable, silent force of a rising tide. Later that day, Cade received a call from the owner. The voice on the other end was cold and clipped. He was fired, effective immediately, for gross misconduct and disrespect shown to a classified government operative. Cade didn't argue. There was nothing to say. He packed his personal effects in a small box, his goatee no longer a badge of confidence but a symbol of his foolish pride, and left the store without looking back. Milo's downfall was more public. Convinced he would be hailed as a hero for exposing a phony, he posted the video he had recorded on his social media channels that night. He captioned it with a snarky comment, "Watch this thrift store girl try to play with the big boys, LOL." By morning, the video had gone viral, but not in the way he had hoped. The comments section was a firestorm of condemnation. Viewers, many of them veterans and actual firearms experts, tore him apart not just for his arrogance, but for his ignorance. They pointed out Ilara's flawless technique, the impossible shot, and the clear terror and respect on the face of the old mercenary. His sponsor, a major tactical gear brand, saw the backlash and dropped him by noon. Their public statement was brutal. "We do not endorse conduct unbecoming of a professional." His follower count plummeted. He deleted the video in a panic, but it was too late. The internet doesn't forget. Serafina tried to laugh it off. At her next socialite brunch, she retold the story as a funny anecdote about a bizarre woman at a gun shop. But her friends, who had all seen the video shared across group chats, didn't laugh. They exchanged uneasy glances. The invitations stopped coming. The calls went unanswered. Her social circle, built on a fragile foundation of status and appearances, didn't want to be associated with someone who had so publicly mocked a legend. She was exiled, left alone in the silent, empty world of her own making. That night, Silas sat at a dimly lit bar, nursing a beer. He didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he looked at the bartender, his voice low and rough. "Saw a woman like her once," he said, staring into his glass. "Back when I was in the field. A ghost. You don't forget someone who can make a shot like that." He never said her name. He didn't need to. Back at the forge, Arthur, the old gunsmith, spent the next week quietly recalibrating every MRAI rifle in his inventory. Just as Alara had said, he found the 0.3mm flaw in 3 of them. He fixed them silently, his hands steady, his mind replaying her grip, her scar, the way she'd handled the rifle like it was a part of her soul. He had worked in that shop for 30 years and had seen every kind of shooter imaginable, but he had never seen anyone like her. He took the blank card she had left on the counter, the one Cade had mocked, and tucked it away in a safe drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what true mastery looked like. The shop felt different after that. The bravado was gone, replaced by a quiet, watchful unease. A week later, a rumor started circulating among the regulars. Someone had found an old military forum post, buried deep in an obscure corner of the internet. It mentioned a Ghost Viper sniper who had taken out a high-value target from an impossible distance during a storm at Sunlaw Peak. The post didn't have a name, just a code name, Arrow. No one could confirm it, but the description, the uncanny precision, the quiet professionalism matched. The story of the woman in the faded windbreaker became a modern fable whispered in hushed tones, a lesson that echoed off the walls of the forge long after she was gone. That the most dangerous souls are often the quietest, and true strength needs no introduction.